Thanks for coming out. It's summer, people have scattered, so really just thrilled to have some time with you this evening. We will do a short preamble, I think each of us, that's the plan. Not too long, because we really want to hear from you, get your feedback. Maybe there's some things that you really like that were accomplished in this past legislative session. As always, there's some things that didn't occur, right, that people wanted to, or maybe some things happened that you didn't like. So either way, we just want to hear your feedback. The next session starts not too long from now, in February. So I already have a list, and I'm sure my colleagues do as well, about things they're going to be working on. So I'll just start by, I'll introduce myself. My name is Derek Slapp, State Senator for the 5th State Senate District. So that includes all of West Hartford, a sliver of Bloomfield, and almost all of Farmington, and then also all of Burlington. And I joined the Senate in a special election in 2019. So I've been serving since 2019. I had one term in the House before that. Before I get into the recap of session, and we'll each introduce ourselves and give you kind of a quick recap and maybe some highlights. I did just want to thank our staff and people who are here, who putting this together and organizing it. Juliana Gilchrest, thank you for all your work and for being here. Daniela, anyone who's contacted my office probably knows Daniela. Daniela Luna is in the back there, wave, and she does a great job with constituent service and helps me tremendously. So anyone wanted to thank them. Let's see, what else? Representative Gibson, who represents part of the north section of West Hartford, and that's relatively new because of redistricting. He is running late, but he will be here. And there's also Representative Sanchez, who is also new to West Hartford. He lives in Hartford, but he has a section now of West Hartford. He's not able to make it. He's out of the country tonight. So we went from having 3 state reps to having 5 because of redistricting. That happens once every 10 years. So anyway, why don't I'll begin by just letting you know the committees that I serve on, and then I'm going to touch on 3 things that I think were kind of big themes of session. And then, like I said, we'll hand it off to Tammy, and then Jillian, and then Kate. And by the way, I am not a big one for titles, so you could call me Derek. That's fine. It's really we can be informal. If it wasn't for the recording and all that, we would probably just want to do a big circle and just all be even closer. But anyway, so I am very honored to serve as the Senate co-chair of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. So a lot of what we end up focusing on in the legislature is based on our committee assignments, because that's where we spend a lot of time, and we try to be, really kind of become experts on that subject. And it takes a while to do that, but anyway, so I serve as chair of Higher Education Committee, and then vice chair of GAE, which is Government Administration and Elections. So things like voting, of course, is something that we've been working on with early voting, no excuse absentee ballots, all that kind of thing. And then I'm also on public health, and aging, and then appropriations as well. And I think this session, the way I look at it is in 3 kind of big buckets. That we were able to make progress on making Connecticut more affordable, and certainly taxes are a big part of that. The largest tax increase, depending on how you count it, either one of the largest or the largest in state history is a piece of that. We really address retirement income as well. Property tax credit, maintain the tax exemption on Social Security when it comes to the state income tax, fixing the cliffs when it comes to annuities and retirement income again. So I think we did some positive things when it comes to affordability. And we really focus most of the benefits on the middle class and on the working poor as well. Second is we improved public safety. There's some great work that Kate Farrar, and I'm sure she'll talk more about it, but did on the Transportation Committee when it comes to just making our streets safer. And then also we passed a bipartisan gun safety bill too. So we can have an opportunity to talk more about that. Yeah, right? Good stuff. We were glad that we were able to do that and cross party lines and get that done together. And then finally, I think we made some good advances when it comes to equality and justice. Representative Gilchrest helped lead the charge when it comes to legislation helping folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I know she'll talk more about that. Mental health, as always, and I put that in that bucket, and Representative Exum was really a leader on that. I'm sure you'll talk more about that as well. And things like early voting, I think, do also help make our community fairer and more just. So I think all in all, it was a successful session. It's great to be able to begin session and go through it when we're not in deficit and we're having discussions about what we do with the surplus and how much of it do we save, how much do we return to taxpayers in terms of tax cuts, how much do we invest in programs and in needed services. And of course, we have massive debt problem in the state of Connecticut, and we continue to pay off billions of dollars in debt, and that's going to help not only our kids but our grandkids and create kind of a sustainable budget long into the future, so we're not going from one budget crisis to the next and to the next, which is bad for taxpayers, it's bad for businesses and towns as well. So I'll leave it there. Again, just thank you for being here, and really look forward to a great conversation with all of you, and I'll hand it off to Representative Exum.
Thank you. Good evening. Can you hear me? Oh, awesome. Okay. It's so good to see you this evening. I'm Tammy Exum, and I represent the 19th District. I came into office during a special election because when Derek Senator Slatt became the senator through a special election in February of 2019, then I ran for his seat and won that last week of April or something like that. I was sworn into place, and then we, of course, the following year had a pandemic, and so this is my first time having what I would say a full, more typical session experience, and it was wonderful to see how the long session rolled out. The committees on which I serve, I was speaking earlier today saying I don't think I have ever served on the same committees since I have been on, because the first time I inherited the committees that Derek was a part of, and then I had different ones the second time round, and this time I am on appropriations, and I was very interested in being on appropriations because I was always told you'll understand it a little better if you're on a money committee. So it was my intention to be on a subcommittee, because appropriations is the biggest committee, and it has about 12 subcommittees, because every committee that we have has a subcommittee that has a money piece attached to it. And I ended up having the great honor of being one of two vice chairs of appropriations. So this has been for me a vertical climb, a lot to learn, but it was really a wonderful opportunity to get to see how pieces really kind of come together, and so that was really for me a big area of learning. I also serve as a deputy majority leader, so I help with some of the running of the floor, and then I'm also a member of the Human Services Committee. The other piece, and it's something I will talk about later, around which I've worked on since has been around disability rights. When I first came in, looking at ways that we could increase employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities. That's the first thing that I was a part of a bill that I wanted to co-sponsor, and that has continued to be an area of interest of mine and passion of mine. So being on Human Services, where Jillian is the chair, was a wonderful opportunity. We did some good work. It became our priority bill. This session 5001 is what it is in the House when it's the priority bill, where we really focused on intellectual and developmental disabilities and looking at how to create a holistic network that would work better at improving the quality of life and opportunities and services for the population. And that builds on, for me, looking at that workforce piece. There was a bridge into doing that. Last year, 5001, was the children's mental health legislation, and I had the great honor of leading that work, and that was our biggest area of focus. That will continue to be my largest area of focus, and so for me, I will talk more about it later, but there was a bill that I passed, that I championed, that was so important this time, that will help hopefully get us to a place where we can move forward in that work and really implement what what it was that we were trying to do. And one other thing I forgot to mention, I represent most of West Hartford is in my district, but I also serve and represent 19% of Avon as well. And in Avon, I know you all see the bears here because I see them. They're always in my yard. But in Avon, bears is like the top priority. And so we did some legislation around bears, and it was a real learning experience. But you may or may not have heard, they had a resident there in Avon who was bitten while walking her dog by a bear. They had homes broken into. They had a bakery, so the person was about to leave and the bear was puffed up. They were running in and out and around Memorial Day. And so while they're beautiful and we love looking at them, we have unfortunately created an environment around nuisance bears because we've been feeding them, and we've kind of done something called habituate these animals. And so there's legislation that I can talk about more regarding that as well. But that was very important in that community, and I know here we see a lot of them, so I wanted to bring that up as well. There's so much to talk about. We did a lot. When I look at what we did, I'm amazed at what we did, and we'll be talking about that, but I'm going to just pass this along for now, and I look forward to seeing you, and thank you for spending your evening with us.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jillian Gilchrest. I'm a state representative for the 18th District, which is a portion of West Hartford. And this legislative session, I served on 4 committees. It was my first time being the chair of a committee. I was the chair of the Human Services Committee, as Representative Exum mentioned. I also serve on the Appropriations Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Public Health Committee. And so in my role on Human Services, really our biggest priority is overseeing the state's Medicaid program, which about 40% of people in the state are on Medicaid, which is our low-income insurance program here in the state. And what I found very troubling and worked on and will continue to work on in future years is that the majority of our rates, which means the pay that the provider gets for performing a service, a medical service, is at 57% of 2007 rates. And so a big priority for me this year was increasing access to health care for individuals here in the state, but also supporting providers. Because we are hearing and continue to hear of the provider shortage. And I think one of the ways we can certainly address that is if we actually pay people what they are owed. And so we began to fix that problem here in the state. The budget did include $15 million, not as much as I wanted, but you can't get everything you want, so we'll continue to come back. But it begins to increase those rates. It also supports the rates for ambulances, and then is looking to do a study. Sometimes we don't like studies, but in this case, we really do need a study to understand how we can continue to increase Medicaid rates year after year and not have these various provider types come to the legislature to pretty much beg to be increased against one another. We don't want it to be who has the best lobbyist that gets the increase in their Medicaid rate. We really need a fair system to increase those rates. Representative Exum mentioned that another top priority of the Human Services Committee was the Intellectual and Developmental Disability Bill. And so there have been wait lists for years. We've been hearing from families and individuals in that community for years, and they were heard. And this is a start. It's not going to fix the problem overnight, but it's a big start. And so we're very proud of that work. In addition to the Human Services Committee, for those who've known me as your state rep for a while, I'm very concerned with women's health and safety, and so a bill that passed this year, we were able to get an endometriosis biorepository established in the state. And what does that mean? That's a lot of long words. So endometriosis is a disease that affects 1 in 10 individuals with a uterus, and it's been ignored for far too long. It creates quite a bit of pain, and then can be throughout an individual's entire body, and it accounts for 50% of infertility. And so the biorepository will be a partnership between UConn Health and Jackson Laboratory. It will begin to study tissue samples because, shockingly, in the year 2023, there is no diagnostic tool and there is no cure for endometriosis. And so we're hoping to move the needle on that. We also finally banned child marriage here in the state of Connecticut. We've been working on that since 2016 and had been able to increase that to age 16, but now we have finally joined other states and the UN in making that age 18. And then we continued our reproductive health work here in the state. Obviously, folks are aware of what's going on across this country, and so we built on the work we did last year to protect individuals who are coming to the state of Connecticut to either receive abortions or gender-affirming care, and protect our providers who are performing that care. We also expanded access to emergency contraception and birth control here in the state. And with that, I'll turn it over to Representative Farrar.
Thanks, Jillian. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. I hope I can bring up the end of this wonderful collection of successes that you've heard, and then really pass it off to you for questions on what you've heard about or things you haven't heard, so we can make sure to answer all your questions this evening. I would also say to what my colleagues mentioned, you know, this is a end of session wrap up, but it really is a moment in time in which we are already thinking, as Derek said, about what's to come. Any session, there's many things that you felt great about, and then there's things that did not get over the finish line. And so your ideas and feedback kind of always lead us in the direction of what's next. I am Representative Kate Farrar. I wonderfully represent the 20th district. You can see a theme here, 18, 19, 20. And that includes the southern part of West Hartford, Elmwood, and I also gained the western part of Newington in the last election as a part of redistricting. And it's been a pleasure to get to know and be the voice of part of the Newington community as well. I really just want to highlight kind of three core areas that I hope really complement what my colleagues mentioned. And one of those is kind of a little bit deeper, in particular on what is often referred to as the finance side of our budget. So you've heard from both Derek and Tammy and Jillian that they serve on the Appropriations Committee. That's the committee in our state that spends the money. But I serve as vice chair of the Finance Committee, and that's the committee that determines how we bring money in the door. And as you heard from Derek, one of the most significant efforts of ours in this legislative session, similar to last legislative session, is how we ensure that we are making our state more affordable, and how are we making sure that we're creating a tax system that is more fair and just in this state. And part of that in last year's budget was accomplishing what was the largest tax cut in our state's history. And now this year we were able to accomplish the second largest state tax cut in our history, and the largest income tax cut in our state history. And as the vice chair of the Finance Committee, as Derek said, that's very targeted on our middle class and our lower income families. And just to kind of reiterate that targeted approach, looking at the income tax cut and the expansion of what is the earned income tax credit in our state, any family that makes $50,000 or less in our state will no longer be paying any income tax. And I think that's real recognition of us, once again, trying to ensure that we are creating a fairer tax system in our state, and also relieving some of the pressure at the local level. We certainly don't set property tax rates at the state level, but we understand the burden that so many of our residents face on that point. And so the continuation of the car tax cap is really important to that. So here in West Hartford last year, our car taxes were capped at a mill rate of 32.4 specifically, compared to the higher mill rate that is in the town. And that'll continue, as well as a property tax credit of $300 as well. So all of these in full are really trying to get at, again, kind of creating more affordability and addressing our upside down tax system. Also, I'm fortunate enough to be the sole West Hartford representative on the Transportation Committee. And so I wanted to highlight really three particular bills that came out of that committee that I think are really pivotal, as Derek said, for our safety, but also just for our future as a state. And one of those in particular was something that touched all of our lives very deeply, which has to do with the epidemic of wrong-way driving in our state of Connecticut. We have seen more crashes due to wrong-way driving in our state history, and on our roads this year, we are on track to have more crashes generally on our roads than we have in previous years. And a lot of that is primarily due to distraction, impairment, and there's a few pieces of legislation that I think really are hoping to create safer roadways moving forward. And one of those is legislation we passed particularly to address wrong-way driving. Our state is making an investment of millions of dollars to address kind of the intersections and roadways where there could be the potential of confusion about going the wrong way into a highway exit ramp. And so we are putting millions of more dollars into DOT guided efforts that will hopefully prevent that type of activity. And we're also incorporating a big education campaign about wrong-way driving and much more about wrong-way driving into our driver's education work as well. Secondly, something we've heard from a lot of people about is the need for cameras, both red light cameras and speed cameras. And so our state legislature did pass a law for municipalities to opt in to putting cameras, particularly in intersections where there have been proven kind of crash data and the need for such cameras. I will just note, and happy to go into more detail, but any revenue that might come from citations that people receive from those cameras have to go back into the town's safety work. So in regards to West Hartford, that would be pursuing more of our complete streets plans, such as sidewalks and road safety efforts. Again, so any of that revenue that might come from those camera uses would go back into our town and making those roads safer. And then thirdly, on the transportation side, I would just mention one other bill that came to me from constituents as kind of an example of how constituents have the best ideas. And that was in particular an effort to expand the number of languages that our Department of Motor Vehicles offers our driver's license exam. You might think to yourself, well, why is that necessary? Well, here in our state, and even here in West Hartford, I know in our schools we have over 70 languages spoken. But across our state, we have so many ranges of immigrant and refugee populations that have made Connecticut home, and not being able to pursue access to a driver's license can often, be a real pediment to their economic security and quality of life. So we were able to pass a bill to expand the number of languages that our DMV will be offering the driver's license from 11 to 37, and our state will be the leading state in the country in regards to the number of languages we offer. And I think that speaks a bit to what Derek said at the outset around just our efforts here to build a more just and inclusive state as well. So I will stop there. Again, I just wanted to highlight some more deeper on the affordability aspects of our tax reform and then some of the transportation highlights. But I just look forward to your questions and see whatever way we can be helpful and partner moving forward.
Great. So I guess I would ask that if you have a question or a comment, that's fine too. You could come up to the podium here so people who are listening to this, it's streaming and it's on the local access station, can hear. If you don't want to do that, that's fine too. You can write out your question or comment on a piece of paper, and you could take it, right? And then we could go that way. And we won't, I think, just because we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity for feedback and for engagement. We won't necessarily, all of us, answer each of the question unless you really want us to, but we'll probably be able to. As you could tell, we each serve on different committees and kind of have different areas that we're really focused on. So we'll try to get you the information. And there's always a possibility that we won't know the answer. So I could speak for myself. There's many things I'm still learning. But if we don't know, we'll find out, and we'll get you the answer. So that said, yeah, if anybody wants to come on up and give us their feedback, then that'd be wonderful. So. Yes, sir. Come on down.
Good job being the first one.
Yes, right, exactly. That takes bravery.
He might have to push a button. I don't think so for that one.
Okay, that is working.
That one always.
So there were a number of rights mentioned that are under attack, but one that wasn't mentioned is voting rights. I know that Connecticut just allowed early voting, but this is a two-part question. What is being done to make sure that voting rights, A, stay accessible, and B, become more accessible? And also with the redistricting that was mentioned, there was a bit of a issue with the way that redistricting was done in that the nonpartisan commission that did was just unable to reach a agreement on the congressional maps, and what is going to be done to prevent that from happening again so that the maps are fair but done in a reasonable amount of time.
Let me, considering I serve on GAE, the committee, I'll try to tackle very quickly a few of those things if any of my colleagues want to jump in. So one thing that I didn't mention in addition to early voting was the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that was passed, and there's a lot of voter protections in there, and I can get you a lot of the details, but to ensure that, we want obviously every vote to count, and there's certain areas, whether it be certain communities or municipalities where there's a history of long lines, as an example, things that serve to disenfranchise folks. That's really what that bill is aimed at. So one, that early voting, and then another piece of it is no excuse absentee ballot, which is also going to help. And poll after poll shows that people want this, and so the process, the way that we vote in the state of Connecticut is baked into our Constitution. So it's not as easy as just passing a law. We have to, like with early voting and now no excuse absentee, it's up to all of you to decide on referendum whether we should go ahead and do that, and then it comes back to the legislature and we figure out the details. So for like early voting, the ballot question didn't say, should there be 14 days or 10 days or whatever, it just says, should we be allowed to amend the state constitution for early voting? So early voting is 14 days, no excuse absentee ballot will go to you all next fall, and then it would be 2 years after that where it would be actually in effect. So we have some work left to do on no excuse. We are woefully behind other states. We pat ourselves on the back oftentimes, say we're so progressive or whatever, but there's many, many other states that have left us in the dust when it comes to some of these voting reforms. So we are making good progress. And let me just say, in terms of the redistricting, this is one of those areas where I think we have it pretty close to how it should be. No system's perfect, but, and actually Representative Exum, sir, I should, let you jump in here, but it's bipartisan in nature, which I think is really important. And it's not, well, Democrats are in the majority, so we just run roughshod and gerrymander the districts and have them look all squiggly and everything, right, to make sure that one party remains in power. It is done in a bipartisan way, so I think that is really positive. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
And I just will add to that, I had the honor of serving on the redistricting committee, and then later it becomes the commission. And because our data was late in getting the census data this year, I wasn't able to be a part of the committee when we were doing actual line drawings. But I was able to do the hearings. We do a good public hearing process, and we talk to all of our members. We really try to vet everyone. But what I found, I went to a conference, and it was in Utah, and it was for people from all over the country. We are really unusual in that we have that bipartisan process, and we do have to negotiate and really spend time talking to each other, and it only goes to the courts if we really get into a place where you just have an impasse. I think we are in way better shape than most states when it comes to that piece. Everyone always thinks there's gerrymandering. The lines have to be somewhere. They do.
I'm not saying the lines were bad. I'm just
Right.
saying that the process was a little slow, and it did end up in the courts eventually.
Yeah, it was slow. I think it was a really unusual year too, just having that census data come late. But thank you, and I do think otherwise that you really did answer the questions around our voting process, and we will have that no excuses question coming up next November, and I think that will be again very popular.
Very big deal.
Yeah.
I would also just add that what's pivotal is we had in the budget funding for our towns to start to implement early voting. And we also had in what is often referred to as our bond budget, which is how we borrow funds for capital expenses, money for the Secretary of State to get new voting machines in our state, because that's actually a significant need for a lot of our towns. So hopefully that will be helpful too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sure. Okay. Hello.
Hi. Nice
Hi.
to see you.
Good evening. I'm Courtney Barnes, and I continue to tell people some of the great benefits of living in West Hartford. And I need to add very clearly that the four of you are another great benefit that I find to having our town represented well, and I'm very grateful. I think we're very fortunate. And you have mentioned tonight some of the accomplishments, and I know there were more. As I've told at least to Derek, and we are, as you all may know or may not know, I think the third or fourth wealthiest state and the wealthiest country in the world. And that's the positive side. We also have the dubious distinction of being one of the top handful of states that has the greatest income inequality. And that just shouldn't be. We can make a difference. We can do something about it. As I think Derek and Tammy know, at least I'm very much a supporter of the organization Recovery for All, and I'm a member of two of the organizations that are members of Recovery for All. One of them is called Fair Share Connecticut, and we have pushed in Recovery for All principally for a marginal increase in the income tax rate for our wealthiest citizens. And again, I imagine you and some, perhaps all of you, know that Connecticut has, I think, 11, perhaps 12 billionaires who live in our state, and over 10,000 households who earn multiples of $1 million a year. And the Fair Share Group and Recovery for All have urged the legislature and the governor to marginally increase the income tax rate on our wealthiest citizens. And I think it's easy to imagine that we could marginally increase the tax rate, a fractional share, and it would not harm their living conditions, their standard, their pleasures, their enjoyment of life in any way. They would not even miss that money, very frankly. Unfortunately, and I say this as a Democrat, we have a governor who's been strongly opposed to this, and I hope all of you who believe in this will remember as we head into the next legislative session that he has been an obstacle to increasing the fractional share of our state's wealthiest citizens. So much more to be done. But I'm glad that we have the four of you here pushing the envelope, and I hope that we'll see more progress next year. Recovery for All, as some of you may not know, is an organization of over 50 an organization that has over 50 member organizations, civic, labor, religious, that promote the notion that all of Connecticut's citizens should live a decent life with sufficient employment, jobs, housing, transportation, health care, education, child care, and so forth. There's no reason why in this wealthy state that shouldn't be the case. And Recovery for All is in it for the long haul with over 50 organizations to press this, as we will be doing again next year. Finally, I would say as I wrap up, I've just read a wonderful book, Poverty, by America. It's written by Matthew Desmond, who was the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Evicted a few years ago. And it just has warmed my heart and engaged me, and I've learned so much about the complications of poverty and the reasons for poverty and the reasons why, alas, many of us who are wealthy, or at least in the middle class and up, find it easy to be indifferent toward the poverty of those who exist in our state, or in some ways, as this author Desmond so articulately points out, we benefit from the poverty of those who live in our state and widely in our country. When I got done with this, I was really wanting to be, as the author says, energized to be a poverty abolitionist. And I really want to do that, and I want to find others. Recovery for All is an organization, if you look at their website, that you can join and support. But that's what we need to do. We can afford to do that in Connecticut. Let's do it, and thanks to the four of you for your efforts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have, oh, which one?
You guys, Bernie, you're be next? Okay. All right.
Hello, I'm Will Mackey. I live in Elmwood. A couple of questions. In setting tax policy, our number one competitor is probably Massachusetts, correct?
Yeah.
So what constraints does that place on the state in terms of setting taxes and remaining, if you will, competitive with Massachusetts? It's always a consideration. The second part is that the root of poverty is political corruption. And there are people who have a vested financial interest in promoting poverty. Please comment.
Thanks for that. I'm happy to start, and then my colleagues can jump in. Just kind of following up on what was shared previously, I think both of you, at the heart of it, get it. Something that I often, sadly, have to repeat to myself and think about as a policymaker, which is that, poverty and inequality, that is a policy choice. We're making that policy choice in our state every year. And as was said, we are trying to move our policy more in the direction of an equitable future. But there is a lot of history that we're fighting against in that regard. But I would just say on the front around tax policy, you're right that often we look to our neighbors in regards to our tax policy. I think it's pretty telling, though, that in our neighbor state of Massachusetts, they actually did have a ballot measure last year that was raising the tax rate on millionaires and billionaires. And they did that by ballot measure because we, as the public, that's something I think as a public, when you poll and when you look at states like Massachusetts, that's something that has broad public support. So there definitely are states like Massachusetts, New Jersey, who have raised and looked at, again, the inequality that's in our tax system and has raised the rates on the highest income earners and the wealthiest in our state who can pay what they owe. And I think that, yes, we have to look at ourselves in kind of the competitive space that we are compared to other states. But we can learn from Massachusetts, I would say, and New Jersey and New York, who have really taken some more strides than we have on this topic.
I kind of tangentially to that, what I noticed from the Human Services Committee back talking about Medicaid rates, what we are finding is we are losing people to states like Massachusetts who are paying people better wages. And so, yes, the tax policy is important, but speaking to the poverty piece, if we're paying people poverty wages, they can't afford to live here. And so we need to look at our neighboring states and realize that we need to step it up.
And one thing, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One thing that I want to mention when we look at poverty that we looked at addressing when we had our former treasurer, Sean Wooden, was around baby bonds and looking at a way. And baby bonds is a concept where you have children that are born who will be on Husky, who oftentimes are born into poverty. And having them, by the time they become 18 years old, they have an opportunity, they have an investment when they're born that they're able to have in the form of whether or not they use it for education or housing or to start a business by the time they're 18 years old as a guarantee. There will be certain things that they need to do, like take a financial literacy class, those kinds of things. But it was an opportunity to look at individuals and give at least something in order to move the needle on being born into poverty. And it was very difficult because it was passed, but it was not called before the bond commission to be funded. And we found it incredibly frustrating. So our treasurer, we now have, our new treasurer, Aunt Russell, who came up with a different funding mechanism that was different from the bonding piece. And now we're able to do that. There's a commitment that the governor has, along with the Black and Puerto Rican caucus and the treasurer and the legislators who were behind this, many of us behind this all along, to look at addressing poverty on the front end, as we understand that that may be an opportunity to start at least changing it just a little bit, addressing that situation. So I think that is important to highlight, to show that it is important to so many of us, and that is legislation that is now not just passed, but is funded as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. I would add, there's a lot of ways to attack this issue. Tax policy is one of them, and we did make our state tax policy incredibly more progressive, as Representative Farrar said, by the changes in the state income tax and the expansion of the earned income tax credit. My focus has been, not surprisingly, Chair of Higher Education, is that how we can improve access to higher education so people can have the tools to succeed. And when you have an education, it helps to lift you out of poverty, right? So like some very tangible things that we were able to do this session. And we worked across party lines to do this, and it was by and large not that controversial, which is probably why many of you have not heard about it, because the press typically covers things when, when we're throwing rocks at each other, there's big debates or whatever. But we were able to expand our debt-free community college program for returning students. So these are non-traditional learners, adult learners who want to go back and earn a new skill, et cetera, right? And so debt is not going to be a challenge for them to be able to go back to community college, and then they can continue on to a four-year school if they want. But the debt-free community college program, we don't call it free because it's not free. You have to apply through the FAFSA, and then it's determined how much is your family or you can pay. But nobody has to go in debt. My point is to go to college, and that is going to be, I believe, a real great tool to help people and to have them get a trade and a skill. And we need nurses, right? We need teachers. We desperately need social workers, et cetera. So we want to create that pipeline. And I think in higher ed is one way that we've been able to do that. So lots of different ways to attack it. But we'll leave it there and see if other folks have questions. Yeah, and you're on deck. All right.
Well, good evening, and I want to just add my thanks. I feel very well represented, so thank you all. I'll say underneath all the priorities that you've shared, there are two things that I think got really short shrift this year. That would be the environment and energy policy in Connecticut. Just a short list of things that didn't get through. Energy transparency for renters. $20 million to efficiency funds. Actually, I just got word today that the layoffs of the contractors in the Conservation Load Management Plan are starting. Senate Bill 4 to transform the energy signature of low-income housing didn't pass. 6647 to make our POCD reflect sustainability pillars didn't pass. Energy Bill of Rights, Data Energy Bill of Rights did not even get up. Solar expansion for condos didn't get anywhere. A concrete roadmap to implement the climate policy that we've already adopted didn't get anywhere. So that's my negative rant. So what do I want? I have 4 questions. You can't possibly answer them, but I'll say them. Why didn't we make more progress? Something I am specifically interested in is how they died. Every one of these, I don't think a single one of the things that I laid out actually got voted on. A couple of them went to appropriations, where I assume they died an ignominious death. Who should I talk to find out who they died? I think one thing that happens is it'll pass in a House and not get to the Senate. It'll pass in the Senate, not get to the House. It'll go to appropriations, it'll go to finance, it'll go to law. And somewhere in the hallway of our legislative building, it gets killed. I want to know who kills them. I want to know why they die, and I want to know what I can do to stop it. And most importantly, I want to know what I can do and you all can do better next year, because we can't have this again next year. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So this is the politics piece. And I mean, this is my take on it, but yes, you're so right. We did not move the needle nearly far enough when it comes to the environment. And a colleague of ours, Representative Christine Palm, is a huge champion and a close friend of mine. And to watch how disappointed she'd be every single day as things were getting killed. And so my take, and then would love to hear from my colleagues, the lobby against environmental policies is very well financed and strong, and they have a lot of power at the state capitol. I think that the advocacy groups are passionate. I think it would help if they were more coordinated in the issues they're pushing. Energy policy and environmental policy can be complicated, and we get elected from all different backgrounds, and we have different expertise. And so making the policies as easy and comprehensible as possible by connecting it to the goal. Like, what's the goal and why would this policy get us to that goal? Because I think it just was so many different bills and topics, and so it's hard to get a group of legislators around that many different things. And so if there can be kind of the climate package, I think that would help us to be able to champion that more, because it is an uphill battle against so many people pushing against the policies. And the behind the scenes is that those conversations, lobbyist to legislator to the leadership, is saying, like, we will debate that bill for 8, 9, 10 hours. And so they won't call it, because we only have so many hours at the end of session. And so things get killed without having a vote because they know the debate would take far too long and that it would likely die anyway. Others could jump.
Yeah.
I was just going to add to what Jillian shared about the idea of a package, or sometimes what's called an omnibus. I think last year what was so successful, we passed a bill, Senate Bill 4, which was the Clean Air Act. Something even by title that everyone would seemingly want to go for. But what was so successful about that is it crossed committee. It was a collaborative package that was worked on, and the advocacy groups were all focused on that. And I think that's what made it get over the finish line. And I don't think we saw the same thing this year strategically. I think we saw a lot of different bills, and that really weighed down any potential of passage. I would say, though, on the energy side, one thing we did pass, which is kind of good given where our conversations were back in January, was some tightening of our energy regulatory role of PURA. We know that we've consistently seen our utility costs go up, and at the same time, the utility company CEO salaries have been going up. Not two things that should be going up at the same time. And so as a part of the bill we passed this session, SB 7, there's a range of more consumer protections, and also ensuring that, for instance, Eversource, can't pass on their lobbying costs or their charitable donations to us as ratepayers. So I think on the energy side with consumer protection, in SB 7 we made some progress, but I agree strategically if there could be an effort around a more coordinated package, I think that would really help our cause around the environment.
Yeah. I would only agree. I was just thinking about that, because when it's interesting when you particularly look at environment, the issues, many people it's a very passionate area, and they may champion a couple of things, and it is kind of all over the place. So if you bat and get one or two. I mean, I was just looking I was like, what is it that were highlights that we showed under energy and environment, black bears and other potentially dangerous animals. And that was a huge area, but that was something that the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, that was a huge area of focus for them, because this has really become a tremendous issue depending on where you live. And it was solid waste management and utility reform and regulatory reform. But I do think if there could be a focus, consolidation, same messaging, that would help a lot. And Jillian was absolutely correct and transparent in saying by the time we get to a certain point in session, whoever's in the minority has the gift of time. And time is what kills legislation. So we have to really start picking and choosing what is important, what do we definitely need to get through, and how can we prevent those incredibly extended debates so that we don't kill important legislation. But we will keep at it, continue to advocate, to write us, to let us know, and to also really try and get that streamlined message would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I guess I would add, I just hope nobody gets cynical or despondent about it. I mean, politics and governing can be so frustrating, right? And it's like a lot of it is incremental, advancements, and that's just how that's how almost always I found the Capitol to work. You're such a great advocate, and we need you to continue to do that. And I think there are some. I mean, so other than environment and energy policy, housing was another kind of great failure, right, in terms of what we weren't able to address. And these housing bills were the top priority of the majority leaders, and it didn't matter. And so you could look and say, well, that's terrible. But actually, I kind of look at it and say, you know what? It's not. The days of like the party boss or the majority leader, the speaker, whatever, saying this is what it's going to be, and everybody just falls in line. That doesn't exist. And in some ways, that's good, because we have to build consensus, right? And we have to, and that's tough, right? It's very messy. But one thing that I think Connecticut has going for us, and certainly like when it comes to your efforts, is that we have campaign finance reform, which I think is critical. We don't generally have bills, that are written by the lobbyists, like not in the same way where, I think of Washington and a telecom bill, and AT&T is probably writing half of that thing, And here, right, probably Governor Rowland's greatest legacy is that we have campaign finance. And so everybody who's running, and 99%, whatever, of the legislature does it. Republicans, Democrats, doesn't matter. So people who are going to run are going to almost always run against somebody, they're an incumbent, but run against somebody with the exact same amount of money. Now, granted, there are some loopholes and things, but by and large, it's a very good program, and it does help reduce the influence of the lobbyists that Kate mentioned. Yeah. So it gives me hope that through great organizing, that good policy, and that's all, of course, subjective, right? Somebody's good policy is another person's, policy they don't want, but that the power is with the people in Connecticut, much more so than when I think of Congress and I think of many other states. So keep at it is my point, please.
Yes,
so keep at it. Yeah.
Martha Banks, you addressed traffic safety, and I drive on I-95 and the Merritt Parkway, and it isn't often very long before I see somebody who's driving extremely recklessly. And I have to say, on the Merritt, I don't think I've ever seen a state trooper, and on I-95, it's rare. I know you've recently, and I think it was this session, instituted a policy on construction sites. Yes. You're going to have cameras and try to monitor the speed within that, but what's being done on the highways? To me, it's a real issue.
Great question. You noted particularly around speed, because I think that's what thank you so much for the light. Yeah. We're starting to fall asleep in the dark together.
Our sunsetting was pretty.
Thanks. Thank you, Marcia, for your question.
Sure.
So you're right that I think speed, and then as I noted earlier around crashes, the number one issue that the data speaks to is impairment. and you're not alone, and the data supports all of it. And that's why, as our state DOT, they have started putting the speed cameras in the construction zones, as you noted. And that is meant to not only be a hopeful deterrent, but also indicate, again, how much of this issue is speeding. And the cameras that I mentioned earlier at intersections are also meant to change behavior, because ultimately this is a behavior change. So your note about needing to see more of a police presence or state trooper presence on the highways is something that we have talked with our police chiefs about. But there needs to be a partnership, I would say, is what we hear from them, between their efforts and technology, right? And that's why we're trying to make sure that we're coming up with opportunities where, you know, we're using technology in a fair and equitable way at the same time that they can have the ability to, you know, be out there and be doing their job as well. And I would say that we will be continuing to ask, you know, that this partnership is stronger, meaning from the standpoint of, you know, yes, we have state troopers, but we also have our own local police departments. And our own local police departments certainly play a role in this type of behavior change. And I know that in West Hartford, the local police are involved in the West Hartford Vision Zero Council, which will have a significant role in trying to make sure that in West Hartford we have zero injuries and deaths. And I think part of what West Hartford's Vision Zero Council will likely come out with are hopefully some recommendations about how we look at our highways in the state as well. So I think the DOT's effort around construction sites is kind of a first step on speed on our highways. But it's really, as you noted, just kind of the first step of many that we have to take. And so your question is, we're not finished, I would say. We're not finished, but it's something we're going to keep working on, especially on the Transportation Committee.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
I have one other question
Please.
or area to discuss. You mentioned capping, and I didn't quite get it. If in West Hartford on the
Car tax?
car tax.
Yeah.
The car tax is it's mill rates within specific communities.
Yes.
And some communities have high property valuations and they're able to have a low mill rate. Other communities, the proper valuations are not so great. Their mill rate is higher. It is very regressive in like a community like Bridgeport. Has any thought been given to coming up with a statewide mill rate for automobiles? Because really, the valuations of autos are not a function of property within individual communities. It's just never made sense to me why, a community like Westport with a lower mill rate, people would pay much less on the same car than somebody in Bridgeport would, who has a higher mill rate.
The answer is yes, but do you want to, I know
Well, no,
Derek's talked about this a lot in
No,
the
the Senate President, Senator Looney,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a bill that he files
It's a big
every
priority.
single year, I think, for
Yeah.
the last 15 years or something. I mean,
Yeah.
so, yeah, the problem is the math, because pretty much any legislator from a community that will be a loser in that equation, in other words, that their mill rate will go up, right, will vote against that bill. So, right, so the question is just trying to figure out, where do you set it? And then it's a question of math. Who's going to vote for it and who's going to vote against it, and where is it? We're kind of getting there in a way by capping it. I mean, it's not as simple and elegant as just saying statewide. I would imagine a statewide one would be, well, I don't know, but it wouldn't be higher than what we've capped it at. You know what I mean? It would be right, a little bit lower, I would think. So I think the cap is a way to try to get at what you're talking about, right? Which is say, a car is a car is a car, no matter what municipality it's in. I would love to get rid of it completely. And that, what you have to do is, and there's been lots of conversations about this for many years, right? And I know that Maybe we will, I don't know. But what we don't want to do is get rid of it, take the revenue from the municipalities, tell the municipalities, good luck, and then what they do is they transfer it all to residential, and that has lots of unintended consequences because people who may, let's say seniors, who have a 10-year-old Honda Civic in their house, right? And so are not paying a lot on their car tax, all of a sudden it gets shifted to their home, right? We don't want that. So we have to figure out how to do that. But I hear you.
Although I suspect that the revenue from car property taxes does not represent, I don't know this, but
Yeah.
a large amount of revenue within communities. I imagine most of the, revenue that communities get is based upon commercial and housing properties.
Depends.
Does it
Depends,
I don't know.
Yeah. It really became an issue actually with the pandemic because we all know about the, used cars and car prices, right, went sky high. And so there was one of our senators who's also a first selectman in Essex actually uncoupled the two rates. And so he was able to, because of the property values the car values were going up, lowered the mill rate so people didn't get soaked. There are other towns that didn't do that and so went up. But
Thank you.
yeah, no, you're very welcome. And,
Hello, everybody. Oh, wow, that's really good. Hi, I'm Constanza Segovia. I'm with Hartford Deportation Defense, neighboring city, but our organization actually represents hundreds of immigrant families, and many of them are in West Hartford, and all ages. And also, we participate in the Husky for Immigrants Coalition that works to expand, as you all know. Well, first and foremost, I just want to thank the full West Hartford delegation, and especially Representative Gilchrest, because of their work supporting this issue at the legislature. It's been really meaningful for us to have your support. As you also know, it's been a challenge this year because we couldn't get to the very low bar of covering all kids in our state to have access to health insurance. And I'm talking about our most low-income kids in our state. And I know that was a big disappointment for all of us, but I wanted you, and kind of, talking about the similar issue with the environmental issues, right? Like what got in the way, and also recognizing that this is an issue that is not, sometimes we frame it because it's us immigrant families fighting for this right and for access, but it's really, when you talk about public health, it's everybody's health, right? And we know that we learned that during the pandemic, and we know that more than, I'm bad with numbers, but 87% of Democratic voters support expansion of Husky to all undocumented children. So the fact that we couldn't get it in the budget this year was really surprising to us, to be honest. So I just wanted to first thank you for your work, because I know it wasn't easy and the budget was tight and a lot of things didn't get through, but also that question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for your work. Having been an advocate and now a state rep, when you feel passionately about something and it doesn't get through, it hurts. So thank you for continuing to work at it. In the grand scheme of the Connecticut budget, it would have only cost $6 million to cover all children under the age of 18. And so to me, that wasn't a lot. And so it was incredibly disappointing. We did incrementally move the needle. And so we were at age 12 and now we will be at age 15, but it won't go into effect until 2025, I believe. And so unless we do something, which we can, because we'll all continue to be pushing. I think there's so many different dynamics, but I guess what I'd say, I think that there's some key people in positions of power who are just more on the page of doing incremental than 18. And so I think it wasn't anything, which is probably hard for advocates to hear that the advocates did. Your advocacy was fantastic. There is the public support. I think it's more of, for those of us in the legislature who support this, we need to kind of come together and be stronger on pushing on those people on the inside to make sure we get it across the finish line. That's my take.
We're with you.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you for informing me, bringing me up to date on some issues I know. A few I know something about, and others I didn't know much about. I was glad to hear my old friend Courtney. Courtney, good to see you. We were too long disconnected, raising the issue around poverty, and I won't repeat any of those. I think the environmental issues are also critical issues. I'm so sick of speeding, the freeways. I haven't seen a state trooper in months. And I know that's a whole other issue. It has to do with lots of things. But I have a whole page full of notes, and I'll boil it down to a couple of things. As Jillian and Derek know, I'm very involved in some higher education issues and working on not so much the access of challenged kids, first generation, lower income kids to college. That's important, but there are many people working on that, and I work with the agencies that do that work. I'm more concerned about those kids surviving college once they get there, because, for example, the free community college or debt-free community college is great. It's happening nationally in some states, but getting in is half the battle, and the other half is getting beyond that. And for example, the dropout rate of community colleges in Connecticut and nationally is terrible. Right. And there are things that can be done to increase retention. Part of it is philosophical. I won't go into the detail. Part of it is funding. I'm very concerned about the impact of the merger of the community colleges and the state universities. And we could spend the rest of the night just debating about that. Big, complicated issue. I have 4 kids who went through West Hartford schools. They did great. It's been great living in West Hartford. So I've benefited from all of the good stuff. They've gone on to to college and careers and are out in the community. They all point to their quality of their education that they got in West Hartford coming back. So that's all terrific. But I retired from a full-time job 11 years ago. I worked for the Casey Foundation for 10 years, and I've now spent 11 years as a substitute teacher in West Hartford. And I spend most of my time in middle schools and high schools, and in the last year mostly at King Philip and at Sedgwick. Great teachers, motivation, but man, are they stressed. The staff there, you probably know this, there's shortages, they're stressed out, they're short of substitutes. Any of you who are bored, come and substitute. My wife said, you found a whole new life, and partly because I like kids, and I especially like middle school kids. I know that's crazy, but I really like middle school kids. They're the most interesting. But we have such diversity in our community and in our school system, and I see that up close. I see the achievement gap with some of the kids I work with. A lot of them are kids of color. A lot of them come from Hartford. The socioeconomic gap, and it relates back to the poverty issue, I guess. I see that in the attitudes that kids have sometimes towards each other, and I see the split between the kids in the honors classes and the kids who are not in those classes. And it's almost like segregation. It isn't just about race. It's a socioeconomic set of issues. And anyway, maybe that's more appropriate to the school board. I actually did a presentation at the school board a few months ago, left them a whole list of issues, and never heard a word from anybody as a result of that. And I was very concerned about social media and the impact on our kids. Huge, complicated issue. The one statewide issue that I would mention, I think that relates to the poverty issue, is affordable housing. And I know there have been a lot of arguments and debates over that and proposals. There are people working on that. But boy, the zoning issue around the state, West Hartford has a lot of affordable housing. And that's partly why I love living in the most diverse community in the state. But a lot of other communities are going to continue to be NIMBY people and fight that off, and I think somehow we have to do better, and that will get at part of the poverty issue. I think that's my only statewide issues. I'm really pleased to hear the 5 of you talk, and Derek, I know we're going to continue a little bit talking about some higher ed issues,
Yeah.
not tonight, but offline.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for being a substitute teacher,
I was
by the
about to
way.
say
I mean, what you do
that. Thank
is amazing. And my Charlie's coming to you next year at Sedgwick Middle School, so be ready for him. I'm going to tell him to behave for you. Though.
I'll look for it.
Yeah.
It's
But-
awesome to be a substitute teacher, but you get extra points for middle school, so I
Yeah.
can say that's.
Yeah, you sure
Not the
do.
age
You're
I
a
would
hero.
choose.
Yeah.
Not the age I would
I agree with you on housing. I mean, there's a lot of different, and there's so much to unpack and so many great points that you made, and we'll talk more, but yeah, I mean, housing's a big challenge.
A few weeks ago, he was in detention, and I was walking him around the school during the detention period, and he took my arm and he said, "Are you Mr. Rogers?" I think I had a cardigan sweater on.
Oh, well, that was it, the cardigan.
Nice. I was just gonna note one thing. If you all didn't grab, there's this handy flyer that Juliana made that's on the table. Well, please make sure to grab one on your way out if you didn't get one on the way in.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and we have the end of
Some here,
session
too.
reports.
Okay.
But this awesome flyer that's on the table.
We can email you one too if we run out.
Yeah. One of the things that it notes is some of the more money that's going to be coming to West Hartford. And one of the things we haven't brought up was that beyond the historic tax cuts that we've continued to make as a state, this year was the largest increase that we've made in education funding in our state's history. And that is, in essence, our state trying to finally deliver on what we should be spending on fully funding what's often referred to as the education cost sharing grant, which is how our town gets state dollars for our education system. And in West Hartford, there will be millions more dollars coming to West Hartford because of us more fully funding that, which again should not only help our education system, but also release some of the pressure on our property taxes to fulfill that funding. And then secondly, I would note, because I appreciate your comment about the continuum of from birth on of what investment is needed in education is this year in the budget, we put forward over $100 million more dollars into our early childhood system. And when you look at the investment, K to 12 versus early childhood, we are not making the investment in early childhood that we need to, considering the immense brain development that happens in those years. And we also are setting up, for the first time in our state's history, it's referred to as an early childhood trust fund, so we can set aside more dollars and get more philanthropic dollars into a trust fund that will just be used on early childhood. So I note those things because I think all of your points are right on, and if we want to think about, that true kind of opportunity that comes from education, we have to think about it from birth. So thank you for that.
Hi, Gary Banks. Let's talk trash for a minute, and specifically landfill, recycling, and composting. My understanding is we're in a bit of a crisis. In fact, maybe more than a bit of a crisis.
Do you want to jump into that?
Yeah, do you want to go about the solid waste? Start.
We agree. And so we did pass one policy. I believe it allows the towns to have grants to implement what's going on currently. I don't know if anyone is currently involved in West Hartford's pilot program with the composting. And then I'll look to my colleagues. That's why we're a great team. Did we end up getting the funding to clean up the mirror site or no? Is that not? Because we're fully aware of the issue that we cannot keep sending our garbage to Hartford. That ended up closing, and at this point, it seems like the garbage would be sent out of the state.
Others.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
where it's going to low-income communities in other states, which isn't what we want.
Recycling no longer has the value that it has.
Right.
Yep.
A lot of the quantities are basically junk.
Yes.
And then composting is a whole other.
I think this goes to the question from earlier on how do we get a more coordinated effort in this state to push for environmental change? Because there are a lot of entities working against progress. in this regard. And a lot of it is tied to how people are benefiting financially from the system as it currently is. And I think there's a lot of folks, in particular in this community, who want to move in the direction of progress. It's just how do we elevate their voices? I also think there's a piece when it comes to this, again, and I said this earlier, I think it is an education piece, and that's why I think making it, so I'll go back to the example years ago, I don't know if people remember, I don't know how many years now it was, but it was pay as you throw, and that blew up in this town. But it was at a time when the taxes had just been increased, and so I think the messaging wasn't so good, but I think going forward, people would be on board to move us in a direction of, improving the.
Landfills and no incinerators.
Yeah, what do you do?
What does it matter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're gonna have too much trash.
Yeah. What else does the?
Well, essentially, what the legislation that we did, which is not a lot around this issue, but it is something with MIRA, it really has us changing our recycling content requirements to certain plastic beverage containers, and it's expanding the scope of the state's organics law by requiring facilities such as educational and correctional institutions to separate the organic materials from other solid waste items in order to recycle them. And it includes provisions related to developing solid waste management infrastructure. But we know this is a tremendous issue. We've seen this coming. We have not come up with a great way of solving it, and it will be something we have to address this. And so we do understand the urgency of it. And there's a lot of just continued work we have to do. Sometimes when we're in the space, it seems that we're so far apart on something that's so fundamental and foundational to the way that we're living. We have a lot of trash, and we have no place to continue to put it. We have to think of different ways to move forward.
Legislatures are by nature reactive bodies. It's just, you can have people who are proactive in the legislature, but the body itself, it's like a battleship trying to move it. And I think this is one of those things where the crisis is here, and the legislature needs to start acting like it. And there needs to be a lot more education too. We all just want to throw it in the bin. To your point, the recycling market has collapsed, and so but we still just throw it in the bin, feel good about it, right? And those days are. I think it's catching up with us. So I hear you. Yeah, Bert, you had a comment.
I'd say 80,000 tons of trash by train and truck go to Pennsylvania and Ohio out of our state. So
right.
It is a crisis.
It's a crisis
in our town.
Yeah.
But it's an environmental issue too. Those trucks are powered by diesel, those trains are powered by diesel, it's polluting on the way out.
Yeah.
And it is complicated, but it is fixable.
It is.
Compost is 30%, and food waste is 30%
Right,
of weight.
right.
You know exactly what to do with
That's
it.
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Bit by bit, we should take it down. And I could go on. There are solutions.
I know that pay as you throw is mentioned, and I see Chris Barnes in the back, who served the town very well as the minority leader. For how many years, Chris, did you serve? 6 years. So, and you probably had you were serving when it was pay as you throw, right? So he could probably
You can speak to that.
can speak to it, and probably has a lot of experience in terms of at the municipal level too. The challenge is because nobody, there's that saying, everybody wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die, right? And nobody wants to pay more. But really, nobody does, right? We can't blame it. Nobody does. And some of these solutions, we got to figure out a way so people aren't going to get soaked. But anyway, Chris, I don't know if you have any insight into. I don't want to put you on the spot. I guess that's exactly what I'm doing. But in terms of pay as you throw or whatever, but because you were handling it at the local level.
I remember I went on vacation. I was actually in Cape Cod when it started to roll out, and I received about 150 phone calls
Right.
from people complaining. I was actually kind of halfway to supporting it, and then I was left alone to drift and see nobody else wanted to go forward with it. It's been, like everyone's point, it's been an issue probably 5-10 years.
Yeah,
We've
10
seen
years.
it coming down the tracks,
yeah.
and we are shipping waste out of state, and that's only going to increase.
Right.
John Phillips has been talking about it for years,
Yep.
right? And we need a solution. And so you're right, you have to react, but that time's kind of past us, right? Where now it's getting into more of the emergency things.
Right.
Yeah, very important issue.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for your service.
Yeah, I just make a pitch for Blue Earth.
Oh,
which is
yes.
a composting company. They have the contract with the district. but
Yes.
You don't need to be in the district to get them to pick up your food recycling. It's just wonderful. They give you a 4-gallon green pail. You fill it up. They'll pick it up every week or every other week on Thursday for me, depending on when you want, how often you need to pick it up.
Yeah.
It's $13 or $14 if you have it picked up every other week. It's, I think, $20 if you have it picked up every week. And they're just a delight to work with. They're a nice group of young people who are running Blue Earth. And the winner is you get 3 bags of compost whenever you want it back at no cost to you in return as part of the agreement you have with Blue Earth. Check it out, blueearth.com. I'm so much an advocate of it. If you try it and you're disillusioned, find me.
Wow, look at Courtney.
Did you all hear that?
He's on the payroll.
I'm a happy customer too. It's good. I'm a happy customer.
Very cool. So, yeah, any other comments or questions? Or I know we're getting close to 8:30, and remind people that this is not the end of the dialogue, of course. So everybody appears super just responsive. So if you have and there's contact information over there as well. So things you want to talk offline about, happy to do that.
Derek, did you want to mention the good special gems of funding we're bringing to the...
Oh, sure. Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can all
Can we have the flyer?
touch on that. So there are, part of our responsibility. I mean, we think statewide, and one of the reasons I love serving this community is because we have so many folks who, while they obviously, care deeply about this community, they're also thinking about statewide issues as well, and things like solving poverty and things like the environment and stuff. So I love those conversations. We also want to remind you that we take our responsibility to deliver for West Hartford very seriously. So we have some things we wanted to, I'll mention one and we can touch on it, but in the bond bill, and that is a bill that essentially outlines how much borrowing the state will do for the biennium. We have one of, if not the largest allocation that the town has had, putting aside school construction, in many, many years. It's $30 million in the bond bill to help with stormwater issues. The MDC and stormwater issues is not necessarily the most scintillating, sexiest issue. But so even if your home or business is not impacted by flooding and stormwater, your property taxes are, because the town is on the hook for many, many millions of dollars over many, many years. There's a sewer separation and there's stormwater issues, and it impacts other communities as well. And so we were able to get, again, $30 million, which is a piece of the problem. It's about a $200 million problem for West Hartford all told, so what, 15% or something. But the point is, we want to jumpstart work on this. We think that it's really a regional problem. We don't have county governments, as you know. It's not fair, I believe, and I think we all agree that for West Hartford taxpayers to solely bear the burden for this. So we're working now with the city of Hartford. We had a meeting actually last week with the town manager and the mayor and other officials to try to identify a project maybe on the border, et cetera, that's going to help both communities. So, in Hartford's environmental justice community, so there's some benefit there as well. But anyway, that was a major focus, and we still need to get it called by the governor, but we're working behind the scenes now with the 2 municipalities to try to do that. So stay tuned. You want to touch on the golf course? Or
I'll touch on the Bridge Family Center.
Yeah,
And I'll just mention there's a grant that we have designated money to go to the Bridge Family Center that really targets and focuses on youth services and looking at positive, productive things. And we're really, really fortunate to have the Bridge Family Center in our community. Particularly, we knew that before, but I can tell you, I can really highlight their work as we look at the impact of young people during the pandemic. And they have a teen center that is a wonderful place and resource for young people to go and to do and to be involved in things that are productive. And this continues to fund that and the many different pieces that they want to do around that. And we know, of course, the Bridge helps the school district and also helps the town in many ways around counseling services and so much more. So to give them this grant funding for this year and likely will continue to be matched in the following year is something that I'd like to highlight because I really appreciate the work that they do. And it also ties in so much with what we're trying to do around children's mental health and really looking for productive, good ways to support children and families. Hey, they will. So the golf course is one time, but the Bridge will have it again next year.
Wynn is clearly not a golfer.
Yeah.
For people who are golfers, this is a big deal. Yeah.
They will. So this is this year, and they will get some more next year.
Okay.
So this is only it for the golf course.
And then as we wrap up June, which is Pride Month, we are the only community to get funding for West Hartford Pride, $40,000. And I really want to thank Senator Slatt for leading that charge. But we're very excited to have that funding for that important work here in our community.
And finishing it out with our West Hartford funding news, I was privileged to secure funds that'll go towards actually creating a mural that will be under where the Elmwood Bridge is. If you're familiar with driving under the Elmwood Bridge, which is the Amtrak and Fast Track Bridge, there will be a new mural that will be worked on this year to really liven up and beautify that entire area of our neighborhood. So stay tuned about the artist and the announcement on that, but thrilled that we could get state funding, so important to that part of our community.
Great. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
keep
you.
in touch with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, guys. Thank you. Nice job, team.